الناس حبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك كن سموحا لخصمك ألقى خصمك أحبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك واحتفل بالمودة إنما
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Welcome to another edition of the Sulaimaan Ravat Show. Now, today we are focusing on the topic of understanding the youth. And the key word there is understanding. You know, we talk quite often in society about the youth, sometimes formally, many times informally. You hear parents talking about their children entering that phase of youth. You hear teachers talking about having to contend with the challenges that come forth from the youth. You hear leaders in society talk about the potential of the youth, but they also then talk about some of the challenges that the youth pose. Some of the aspects that some of the problems of society are to a large extent attributed to the youth, but then on the same token, many of the future objectives of a family or a community is hinged onto the shoulders of the youth. So a very vital component of any community, of any society, of the ummah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So we need, the purpose behind this particular program is to deepen and broaden our understanding when it comes to the youth. First up, we take a look at it from an Islamic perspective, and joining us on the line from Durban, we have the Imam of the Amshlanga Masjid, Moulana Muhammad Vanka. Moulana is also a well-known and well-traveled orator and speaker, and Moulana joins us this evening on the line. Moulana, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Moulana Safwan, assalamu alaikum to the esteemed viewers of ITV. Barakallahu feekum, jazakallahu khairan for the opportunity.
Now, talking about it from an Islamic perspective, when it comes to the youth, how do we define youth in Islam?
بارك فيكم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على المبعوث رحمة للعالمين نبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وبعد. Respected viewers, indeed this is a very, very pertinent, a very important topic. And I think this is on the lips of many people in many social gatherings. This is a question that generally arises in terms of the youth. I think one is, we lay the blame on the youth. But I think as parents, where are we falling short? Is there anything wrong in my life because of which my child is suffering? Whilst every father wishes to impress on his or her child the good, that my son must only see my good, he must not see my evil. But wallahi, until and unless we as parents will not become role models to our children, we are living in a false paradigm. So in the Quran Kareem, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala makes mention in various different places in the Quran, إِنَّمَا أَمْوَالُكُمْ وَأَوْلَادُكُمْ فِتْنَةٌ. Allah Ta'ala says, verily your wealth and your children are a test from the side of Allah upon you. The famous surah of Quran, Surah Kahf, which we normally recite on Friday, Allah Ta'ala speaks about the cream of His creation. Allah Ta'ala is speaking about the cream of the crop. When Allah Ta'ala says that إِنَّهُمْ فِتْيَةٌ آمَنُوا بِرَبِّهِمْ. We are not speaking about a scholar who is perhaps in the latter part of his life, but we are speaking about the youth in the prime of their life. And Allah Ta'ala speaks about these youngsters who all of the internet. So why is the youth have a great role to play in our community? And when we travel the world today, unfortunately, to a great extent, in certain circles we have isolated our youth and we haven't given them the alternatives. We have identified where the problem is, but we have not given them the alternative. And I think perhaps one aspect that we can possibly look at is the relationship between the elderly people with the young children, the relationship between the scholars, and the youth of today. This is something that we have seen when we have traveled the world. It's a problem, and many youth have highlighted this problem. So I think this is something which is very, very pertinent in this day and age. And this is a topic that, inshallah, let us try and unpack this topic in the light of Quran and Sunnah.
In the time of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, what role did the youth play?
Okay, in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, when we study the youth in the time of the Nabi ﷺ, they played a vital role. They played a vital role. We look at examples that are found in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. We take example the life of Sayyidina Anas radiallahu ta'ala anhu. What an amazing Sahabi he was. I mean, today the scholars of jurisprudence have taken out laws of Sharia, taking from the life of Anas radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Anas radiallahu ta'ala anhu, as a young boy at a tender age, he said, while sitting with my grandfather Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the famous hadith, دع ما يريبك إلى ما لا يريبك. Abandon those things that put you into doubt and embrace those things that remove any doubt. From this particular hadith of the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, there are many laws of Sharia that the scholars and the fuqaha and the jurists have taken out. So like that you find when we study the youth in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, the Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, much emphasis had been laid on the youth. And unfortunately, like we mentioned in the beginning, when we study the youth, this is something we have marginalized them. And I've spoken about this, and the scholars have discussed this on various forums, on various different platforms. So I think we need to go back to the basics. We need to go back to the teachings of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I always say that this is the reference for navigation and guidance right up to the day of Qiyamah.
When we talk about youth, Moulana, what are some of the attributes that we need to look at within that category of youth that show us the potential that they have, but then also those attributes which highlight to us the vulnerabilities that they face to a greater extent than others?
Yes, when we open the Quran al-Kareem, Allah speaks about Sayyidina Sulaimaan alayhi salam. Sulaimaan alayhi salam was the son of Dawood. Dawood alayhi salam was the king of Palestine. Now, we have two incidents that are recorded. I just want to share with you perhaps one incident that is recorded in Quran al-Kareem, where Allah makes mention of this incident, where there was this farmer, and his shepherd, abandoned his flock of sheep and grazed on his farmer's land, destroying the crops, and he presents the case to Dawood alayhi salam. So Dawood alayhi salam, they come to him, and when we study the life of Dawood alayhi salam, he used to divide his days into three. One day with his family, one day was reserved exclusively to resolve the disputes amongst people, and one day was exclusively for the worship of Allah. So one day was exclusively reserved to resolve the disputes amongst people. The two people came to Dawood alayhi salam. وَهَلْ أَتَاكَ نَبَأُ الْخَصْمِ اسْتَصَوَّرُوا الْمِحْرَابَ. Two people came barging, they scaled the wall. إِذْ دَخَلُوا عَلَى دَاوُودَ فَفَزِعَ مِنْهُمْ. When they entered like this, Dawood alayhi salam became a bit skeptical. He became a bit nervous that perhaps these people have sinister motive, some hidden agenda. This should not be a day that they should be up. So nonetheless, one of them comes to Dawood alayhi salam, and Allah speaks about Dawood alayhi salam in various different places in the Quran al-Kareem. Many times what happens as parents, when our children make any suggestions, what do we turn around and tell them? Who are you to tell me? So Dawood alayhi salam, these two, the father and the shepherd, they present the case. So the person says that last night the shepherd, he abandoned his flock of goats and sheep and destroyed my crops. We want you to analyze the case and make a decision in the matter. So Dawood alayhi salam, we looked at the case, and he tells the shepherd, because of negligence on your part, your flock of goats and sheep will have to be given to the farmer in view of the crops that were destroyed. They accepted the verdict of Dawood alayhi salam. Unlike what happens today, you go to a mufti, you ask a question, and you don't find the answer favorable, and you start running, you start fatwa shopping. So what happens? They walk out, they're accepting the verdict of Dawood alayhi salam. Sulaimaan alayhi salam, as a young boy, the Mufassirin have explained that he was 9 years of age. Yes, 9 years of age. So he asked both the father and the shepherd, that what decision did my father take in this matter? They said, this is what your father has said, that because of negligence on my part and my flock of goats and sheep had destroyed the crops of this man, so I would have to hand over my flock of goats and sheep to the farmer in view of the crops that were destroyed. So Sulaimaan alayhi salam,
he looks at both the men, and he said that my father has taken a one-sided decision. If I was asked for my decision, I would have taken a decision that accommodated both parties. So Dawood alayhi salam, the king of Palestine, who is the father, he is told that your son Sulaiman has some other input in this matter. So Dawood alayhi salam summoned his son. He said, how would you have resolved the dispute? He said, with utmost respect. If I was asked for my decision, I would have told the shepherd, because of negligence on your part, and your flock of goats and sheep has destroyed the crops of the land, I would have told the shepherd that you take your flock of goats and sheep and give it to the farmer momentarily for a period of time, and in the interim, you take the man's farm, once again cultivate the land, irrigate the farm, cultivate the land, bring the farm back to its original condition, like it was previously, and once you have cultivated the land, and once the crops have grown on the farm, you take the farm and hand it back to the farmer, and you take your flock of goats and sheep back. When Dawood alayhi salam heard this suggestion, he tells his son Sulaiman, Al-Qadha ma qadayt. That, oh my son Sulaiman, indeed you have made a better decision than mine. I now retract my decision, and now my decision is in accordance with my son of tender age. When we open Bukhari, there is another incident that there were two women in the time of Dawood and Sulaiman alayhi salam. A wolf came, both of them had children. A wolf came and devoured one of their children. And these women began to argue with one another. One woman said that this is my child. The other woman said this is my child. So they argued the matter between them, and they come to Dawood alayhi salam. Dawood alayhi salam, he looked at both this woman, and he made a decision. He said that, you know what? The child belongs to the elderly woman. They accept the verdict of Dawood alayhi salam. As we walk out of there, Sulaiman alayhi salam is standing. What decision did my father take? This is the decision that your father had taken, and the child belongs to me. So Sulaiman alayhi salam said that, you know what, my father erred in his conclusion. So Dawood alayhi salam is told that your father has some other input in this matter. So Dawood alayhi salam asked his son Sulaiman, how would you have resolved this dispute? He said very simple. He said, bring me the baby. He takes a knife. He places it on the head of the child. The younger woman says, don't slaughter. He said, you are the mother. Naturally, that woman, she will have a greater love, greater bond and affection towards the child, and she said, don't slaughter. So when we look at the Quran al-Kareem, there are many examples that we can take. That is, the great prophets of Allah wa ta'ala. So, this is something, that we need to seriously look at. As parents, where are we falling short? Do we entertain suggestions of our children? And for many of us, as parents, what our children achieve is never enough.
Now, Moulana, in terms of some of the issues that you touched on, right, each one of it obviously is pertinent and can be an independent discussion all on its own. You spoke earlier on in your comments about, the generational gap between parents and youngsters, etc. But in the main, what would you say are one or two of the key points that society and leadership within society needs to keep in mind when it comes to steering the youth in the right direction and maximizing on their potential, making them feel valuable, making them feel relevant?
Yes, I think this is another very important aspect, Moulana. Where unfortunately today, when we look at many parents today, we frown upon our children. We never acknowledge our children. Again, when we look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, subhanallah, I think just to digress for a minute or two, in terms of equality amongst our children, many of us do it, many of us, we are guilty of this. The Nabi of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, one day he's sitting, a Sahabi was sitting next to the Nabi of Allah, and his son came running to him. The Sahabi picked up his son, embraced him, kissed him, he made him sit on his lap. A few moments later, his daughter came running to him. The Sahabi, he looked at his daughter, embraced her, and he made her sit in front. And he said, oh Nabi of Allah, I wish to give a gift to all my children. Nabi alayhi salam said, why is this unfair treatment? Your son came running, you made him sit on your lap. Your daughter came, you made her sit in front. Nabi alayhi salam said, I will not be a witness to this unfair treatment. So this is the beautiful deen that Islam has given us, where every aspect of our deen has been discussed. So, as parents, at times we do not support, our children in the endeavors. They intend to do a certain thing, to pursue a certain way, and we don't support them. We need to encourage our children. This attitude that many of us have displayed as parents, it's either my way or no way. It doesn't work that way. We need to become the friends of our parents. What does the Nabi of Allah, the friends of our children, rather? What does the Nabi of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam say? A time will come close to Qiyamah, أَدْنَا صَدِيقَهُ وَأَقْصَى أَبَاهُ, where a person will distance his own parents, and he will draw close to his social friends. You ask a young boy, tell me who is your dad? No, you won't know my father. But my social friend is so and so. And one of the reasons for that is we contribute as parents, where we break off the communication line between us and our children. For many of us, it is only business. There's no social interaction. There's no social interaction between us and our children. Many a times we find we speak to scholars and ulama. That you speak to the children, they speak to scholars, they speak to ulama. Can't you open up to your parents? No, my parents are not. I cannot speak to them. So this is a very vital topic, something which is, very, very important in this day and age. We need to open up the door of communication, between us and our children. And we need to support them in their endeavors. Our children, their likes, their dislikes, we need to give them the moral encouragement. And we find an aspect which unfortunately, we have taken for granted, is that we don't praise our children. And this is something that goes a long way. Taqiyya has recorded an amazing incident. If you open the Tamil al-Hafidin, Taqiyya the worst one father, he comes to Sayyidina Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu wa ardah. And his father complains to Umar bin Khattab that my son is very rebellious, he's very disobedient towards me. So Umar bin Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu asked his father a few questions. He said, number one, هل علمته القرآن? Have you taught your son the knowledge of Quran? He said, no. هل علمته العلم? Have you disseminated the knowledge of deen to your son? He said, no. هل علمته العدب? Have you taught your son respect, mannerism, and conduct? He said, no. He then tells him that you are grateful that the son of yours has not beheaded you. You are grateful that the son of yours has not beheaded you. When you have not invested in the child from that young age, what else can you expect from the child? What else can you expect from the child? Subhanallah, when we look within the Quran, there are amazing examples, that we can, but unfortunately today, I always say this, we have not studied the language of Quran. We have barred ourselves from volumes of Islamic knowledge. So we need to make a concerted effort. We are reciting the Quran on a daily basis. But what is the lesson of Quran? What are the messages that we ought to be taking from Quran?
Most pertinent advices indeed. Moulana, Jazakumullah so much for your time, and we look forward to speaking to you again in the future, inshallah.
Barakallahu feekum, Jazakallahu khairan, Moulana, for this opportunity, and we ask Allah wa ta'ala to grant us the tawfiq and the ability that we become role models, to our children. Wallahi, this is the priceless gift of nature. Barakallahu feekum, Jazakallahu khairan.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
That was Moulana Muhammad Venka joining us on the program from Durban. He's the Imam of the Shlanga Masjid. Right, time for a break. When we come back, we talk more about understanding the youth. Welcome back. So, this evening on the program, we've been discussing the youth, but more specifically, we've been asking ourselves, how do we better understand the youth? The potential, the vulnerabilities, the challenges that they face, their place in society, the connection between them and so-called adults. I suppose in many ways, There are those from the youth who would consider themselves adults as well, or the elder generation, if we can put it that way. The connection, the disconnect that may exist in certain paradigms. We need to understand those issues better in order to then plan better and in order to be able to implement better. Now, before the break, we had the Islamic perspective with Moulana Muhammad Venka from Durban. Now, joining us in studio, we have Shakil Garda. He is with the MSA Union. He's also with the Muslim Youth of South Africa. And I understand that even though he's studying law, he's got some aspirations in terms of journalism. Shakil, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Very honored to be here today.
So, law is what you're studying at the moment?
Yes, it is. Yeah. I did a major in media as well for 3 years. So that would be why the journalism on the side with Salam Media and so on. And community work as well through the two organizations, MSA Union and Muslim Youth of South Africa. So hope to understand, this question about the youth and how we find ourselves linking up with adults, with ulama, with our parents, and also with other people our own age, and then those younger than us as well, and how we all form part of a continuum, and how we can transfer skills and understand one another before we make the mistakes that we don't really want to actually make, inshallah.
I think the key thing here is all about perspective, right? Adults have their perspective, leaders have their perspective, scholars have their perspective, and then the youth have their own perspective. From the perspective of youth, how do they define themselves? Who do you consider to fit within that category of youth?
So, I think politically they would say, up until the age of 35 or so, when with the Nabi Sallallahu having received his Nabuwa at the age of 40, some would say, up until that age you're still a youth. Life only really begins at 40, and those who turn 40 get very happy when you say that, obviously, because they, yes, I'm still young. But I think for us, it's the years that you're studying, the years that you're spending, maybe in your parents' home still. By the time you're leaving home to, move away or get married, then that's when you sort of need to adult up, as they would say. So I think for me personally, my understanding would be, during high school, during primary school, then going on to university, the years of learning, the years of nurturing, basically, would be your youth years. And obviously spending a lot of time socializing with friends, spending a lot of time sleeping, catching up on, sleepless nights that you may have had. So that would, encompass the youthful years, I would suppose.
I suppose in life, many things get complicated by misunderstandings, right? And as I said, the adults have their perspectives. And what I want to, touch on and elaborate on here or get more perspective on in this particular segment is how do the youth see things? Whether others agree or not is not the point. Simply for us to understand, how do they see things? In terms of the youth, what would you say are some of the key misunderstandings for them? Which are the areas where they feel very misunderstood?
So I think with regards to youth, it's almost like the idea of youth being lazy or not having a passion or a drive, where people would assume that no, because this kid is sitting here the whole day at home or relaxing, or there's something behind that reason, that it must be they're lazy, or they have no passion, they actually don't really wish to go anywhere in life because they're occupied on their phones or doing things that the parents didn't do when they were growing up, because those things just never existed. But I think when you speak to them on their own, then there's wisdom that comes from the kid himself or the youth themselves, our peers, themselves, that actually speaks of a lot of passion, speaks of a lot of drive. Another thing would possibly be the adherence to Islamic practices. People would perceive the youth as a very lost generation. But if you speak to them on their own, there is a lot of insights again as to their own ways of maybe practicing Islam or practicing any religion that they do. But it might not be the same as what the parents are doing, but in their own way they do, love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they do love the Prophet, but sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but it might not be in the manifested way or the strict way that has been prescribed. But there are many people asking questions about themselves and their identities, and it's all in the framework of how do I become a better adult, how do I become a better Muslim, how do I become a better person in the country especially, just not in the same way that parents are seeing it. And then another thing again, there was a time when somebody said, no, these young people don't know where we came from, and they don't really appreciate our heritage and our history and what we fought for to be where we are today. And so we said, okay, thanks to the uncles and aunts who felt that way. And we asked the same group of young people they were referring to whether they do actually remember where their grandparents grew up or where their parents grew up, or the struggles that they had to fight for during apartheid. And when we spoke to them on their own, they actually shared like troves of information about how they actually did understand and what the legacy that they have to take on and appreciate. But there's a lack of understanding between the elders and the young, and discussion, I think, more formal discussion. But we as young people pick up a lot just from, the peripheries, listening and just paying attention, even though it might not seem that way, I think.
Would it be accurate to say that youth feel, when it comes to this aspect of laziness, that there's a kind of blanket judgment that not only parents, but teachers and others within that category of adults just have this general perception that youth are lazy. The only difference is some are more lazy and others are less lazy.
So it's like all humans are equal, but some are more equal than
Yeah.
others. No, I think definitely, I think that there's definitely a blanket statement, and somewhere there is maybe a lack of motivation in certain cases that will then manifest in true laziness. But I think people work different hours sometimes, yeah, especially our age at university. So in the day it might look as if, if somebody's lazy, they come home, they're just sleeping. But maybe they're catching a nap so that at night time they can actually do the work that they feel they are best productive at. So it might not be the conventional 9 to 5, but maybe behind closed doors or behind the scenes, these people are actually doing a lot of work. And some people work better with groups. So it might not be that you're sitting at home at a desk, but you might be working better with your friends at university or at school. So the lazy blanket statement, actually, I would argue that it actually creates laziness as well, because you're saying that we're lazy, so then we will then be lazy, but we're not. Maybe saying something else could be attributed to the issue, and then solving that issue. The idea of us being lazy or being seen as lazy then sometimes allows people to fit into the comfort zone of, okay, they said I'm lazy, so I am lazy, so I'll then be lazy, and that'll be it.
Do you think that there's a kind of misunderstanding of how to define certain things between the generations? So a parent who sees the kid with the mobile thinks that is wasted time, not time that is utilized constructively, coming from the perspective of the parent. But in terms of the kind of world that the kid is living in or the teenager is living in, there may be a lot of constructive things that are being done on that particular mobile at that particular moment. So each one is saying, okay, well, I'm right, looking at it from a different prism. Do you think that's at the core of the issue?
I think that's a very good argument actually to make, because so if you look at our parents' generation or grandparents, they all grew up in small communities, Fitas or District 6 or wherever they came from, and those communities were built on human interaction. It was built on always seeing each other, just built on always being in each other's faces, really sharing food, sharing ideas, and eventually that would be a microcosm. And those who broke away. And today, look back at it nostalgically, I would argue that today our Fitas or District 6 or whatever is online. So we may make friends on there that we wouldn't really have met in person until such time that we do. But people find common interests with each other. So you might find friends that are all studying law, or all studying Islamic studies, or Hifz, or all studying, beauty course, or all studying whatever it is that people are doing. But you find friends in your own circle, so that means your network is building, social capital is being built. And when you actually do start working or do start implementing that in real life, so-called real life, you have a whole lot of accomplices and allies that can do that with you. So the world is actually a bigger place. And so I would argue that yes, our phones are being used constructively, ideas are being shared, and information is obviously very accessible today. So I can tell someone there's an event happening that they wouldn't have ordinarily been invited to, because that would have depended on a poster in the mosque or in the school. Whereas today it's like way broader than that. So I think, yes, there are drawbacks, but largely there's a disconnect because parents see that as unproductive time. Whereas I can tell you, for one, that you've made many friends on there, you've made many connections on there, and through that have learned tons of information that maybe you wouldn't have had you just put the phone down and let it on charge.
Are the youth in the main rebellious?
So I think that's obviously, again, it could say a blanket statement. Rebellious, definitely innovative, trying to change the mold, trying to reinvent the wheel in a way, or maybe add some more cogs to that system. But I wouldn't say rebellious in every sense of the word. And then you have to define rebellion. Is it, taking to the streets, because then people argue that we shouldn't be doing that as well, or is it, fighting against what parents expect of you? That could be true. Maybe there is rebellion taking place there, but I don't think it's rebellion. I think it comes from a place of youth wanting to be creatively changing the world that we live in now, so that tomorrow looks a bit differently than it does today, but it will be for the better, I think.
I suppose they're also more willing to challenge the status quo, because they're not as sensitized and not as conscious of some of the risks of doing that. And adults, having burned their fingers a few times along the way, are a little bit more cautious, a little bit more circumspect, very careful about not rocking the boat too much, whereas the youngsters don't have those inhibitions.
Yeah, so I have somebody, I'm not sure who actually originally said this, but somebody said, the best years are wasted on the youth. Because some would argue that, we're doing nothing with our time. But I think what you're saying is correct, is that the youth that are involved in trying to shift the boat, as Moulana mentioned now, are people that see that there is a potential for change. And we don't come from the same stigmas of, no, don't say that, or keep quiet, or that man's older than you, or that lady's older than you. You can't, that's rude, or that's loud. Speak soft, or, don't write it on Facebook. So we don't have those same conventional norms that existed in maybe the smaller communities. And so it may seem as if there's unruliness taking place. But I think at the very core of it is it's a pure intentioned motive or move in all spheres to change that which exists today, to maybe be more inclusive, to maybe be more understanding, to be softer in its approach for the betterment of society, for the greater good, fard kifaya, you could argue as well. But I don't think that this is understood by adults. So the niyyah is there, but the way it looks might not be the way parents wish it did.
There's an example that comes to mind, a very recent one, and I suppose in many ways a very kind of relevant one. Fees must fall. There were many adults saying, listen, okay guys, we understand where you're coming from. The concerns are legitimate, the complaints are on its place. It's not workable, it's not practical. The numbers tell a different story. You're just wasting your time unnecessarily. You're creating bad publicity. You're creating a bad image for the country internationally. But now, what's it, 2 years, 3 years later, whatever Zuma's intentions may or may not have been when he made that particular announcement, one would have to concede that it was that, if you want to call it the exuberance of the youth, or the fact that they don't have those inhibitions and they said, well, you know, it has to be made workable, that actually prevailed at the end of the day.
Yeah. So I think it's almost that unrelentlessness to say, listen, at all costs, we will take to the streets, we will sleep outside, we won't study, exams will happen eventually, and all those things. I think that today, as Moulana just mentioned now, that fruit has come from that. And if you look at, I met somebody just 2 days ago who said her son-in-law was always involved in protests during apartheid. And she would tell him, you know, my son-in-law, when are you going to stop? When are you going to stop? This is fruitless. So I told her, look, alhamdulillah, they were actually, hulle deelgeneem in Afrikaans, you know, they actually took part. She said, yeah, hulle het deelgeneem. But at least today, they also went on to have good careers and also have well-accomplished children. So it's an anxiety parents have of us as well, is that to be involved is dangerous, and you're not going to actually have a degree one day, you're not going to have a career one day, you're not going to be productive. But if they can see that there are many examples among themselves and their children, our parents basically, that actually went on to achieve things after being the protesters, then there is value in being involved. And I think, you know, a lot of effort was made to try and motivate from Islamic perspective as well, that we have a duty to be socially involved, to be socially active. And I think today, alhamdulillah, we have come somewhere in that process of, you know, ascertaining Zuma's intentions and actually making it a reality. But I think the idea that we need to be involved is the one that we cannot dispute now after 3 years or so of involvement.
When it comes to the relationship between the youth and the ulama, how would you define the existing status of that relationship? How would you describe it?
So I think that our society is still hierarchical. So I think it's been that way since maybe the beginning of Islam in the country, or maybe generally, you know. The hadith about the Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam being approached by a Sahaba to ask very intimate questions about his own personal life. I don't know if we have that same behavior today where I can just go and ask an alim or a scholar, listen, Imam, this is happening, how do I address it? Maybe I can, because I've, alhamdulillah, been able to approach people in that way, but not everybody has that personality. And I think there's a flatness that needs to happen where people have access to the ulama, that we can have roundtables, you know, for want of a better word, shuras, sitting outside a campfire. And I think there has been many initiatives by certain individuals and groups in our community across the country to flatten this, you know, system where the only time you ever see an imam is in the mosque doing the khutbah or ustad in class. There has been a means to make it a bit more casual. But I think largely there is still the go-to people that would go and ask the ulama on behalf of the young people. So it wouldn't be that anyone can just go and ask and there's a easy relationship. So I think there's a fear still sometimes when, oh, Moulana's coming, you know, you must behave. Or the other way around, no, you know, leave them even though they're there, we don't mind, we'll carry on. So it's either a super adherence or it's a rebellion. So there's no, you know what, let's walk this road together. The young and the older, the learned and you know, still learning, I suppose. And also I think an understanding of what it means to be a scholar of deen or of this dunya as well. And that deen and dunya together makes the community, and as I said earlier, fard kifaya, to give value to the young people that are studying other things, not just dini matters. And say, listen, we acknowledge that one day you will be playing a role in society. And giving them that self-esteem would allow them to sit on the table with the alim and actually appreciate that they're all contributing to the same table. So, but I definitely think there is like sort of a consciousness that says, you know, we can't say that in front of the alim or the Moulana or the ustada. We need to be careful the way we speak, which is true. But I think that at the same time, maybe it is changing, but more needs to be done to get the ulama to sit with us as the youth and say, how can we help you? How can we hear your concerns? And then draw from the sources, you know, to make it easier for us to live in this generation that we are at the moment.
Do you think it's changing in terms of accessibility when it comes to the ulama and the youth, with more younger ulama on the scene than before? And also with technology, I suppose, make it a little easier Nowadays, you can WhatsApp the alim, or you can interact on Facebook, or you can interact on Twitter, email, those kind of things. Unlike yesteryear, when you had to physically go and speak to the person or go through the whole very long process of writing a letter.
Yes, I think definitely from our perspective at the MSA, especially at FITS, I was quite involved, alhamdulillah, in organizing the speaker for Zuma. So I was 20 or so, and now I have to phone the Moulana, and it's the first time that I'm doing this, obviously, because it's now a masjid technically that you're running. And now you realize, okay, that the lines are blurring. You can actually speak to the Moulana or the alim or the imam overnight sometimes at the last minute to say, listen, we've had a cancellation, can you please come through? And they're like, some of them will say, yo, bliksem, hoe laat ben jy my? Or, how dare you phone me so late? Do you know, it's like, do Juma's tomorrow and you're only phoning me now. But some of them do it with such a humor, such a love for us young people, that the gates open and the floodgates open, and so to the wisdom and so to the advices. And I think that there is strides being made. And that's from the older ulama. And the younger ulama come through and they talk just like us, some of them take the mihrab or they're doing the khutbah, and they talk to us like they are one of us. And some of them were at university, so they actually know the challenges. They know that we just rushed from class, or we're about to go to another lecture, and we don't really have that much attention span. But they know how to make it accessible. The information is there. And afterwards, many people approach the ulama sometimes if they come and they do a lecture at university. Shukran Imam, or thank you so much, we had a good time. Can you please give us your number? I'd like to phone you in future for advice. So you see these interactions taking place where I think before maybe there would have been a panic. No, I can't speak to the Moulana or the Imam. I'm too young, or I'm not dressed appropriately. But today, people are finding it easier, I think, because the ulama have come down to our level and said, you know what, I will speak like you, I will use the slang that you use, I will, talk about the guys and the girls and the birds and the bees in a funny way that is accessible to us. And then again, motivate why we are at university, for example, and give value to that student that's coming there every day to study, and say, no, what you're doing is actually valid, and may Allah guide you.
What advice would you give the ulama in terms of them resonating with the youth? Because there's this perception, right or wrong, that the youth find greater relevance with international scholars. Is it just because of what is easily accessible then loses its novelty, and therefore the youth turn towards those who are on the international scene? Or is it that there's something about overseas scholars that make them connect with the youth more effectively than local scholars?
So I think it may go back to what Moulana said earlier, where we are on our phones more than we are actually around, right? So the phone is the access to Mufti Menk, it's the access to Yasser Qadi, and so all these other shuyukh. So it makes it easier, that's our point of call. Whereas before it would have been the human interaction. So I think maybe that's why those scholars then gain more relevance among our age group. But I don't think it's a blank statement to say, it's only international scholars. If you look at in Johannesburg, for example, Moulana Shakir Bayat, Moulana Zakaria Matiani, and I'm obviously leaving out many other names, they've made they made themselves available to youth groups. And, other youth of Sheikh Jamil Abrams as well comes to the youth and says, how can we help you? They create platforms. The advertising is fun, it's youthful, it has colors, it has blue and pink and green, and apparently they even had some, like a car show outside the event. So people are there for a primarily Islamic event, going to learn the deen, but around there you have a car show and you have a braai, and so it creates this camaraderie around the musalla. And so I think that it's making accessible. So it's not just the international scholars, but those who walk around here in Johannesburg as well. And then in the Cape, I think Moulana Dawood Samson as well, he comes to the level of people, he speaks the language of the people, and people go home and say, hey, Moulana said it like this, and this is exactly how it actually is. And another Moulana may say it the same way, in a more formal tone, in a more, polished English or whatever, but they might not go home remembering it. But with these ulama, you actually almost get like a 140 character soundbite out of what they said, that you repeat at home and to your friends, and that actually changes people. So definitely the local scholars and the younger scholars are making strides, I would say.
Right, time for a break. When we come back, inshallah, we continue the discussion. Welcome back. So we're talking about understanding the youth, and our guest in studio this evening, Shakil Garda, he is currently at university studying law. He is also with the MSA Union, amongst other activities that he's involved in. Now, before the break, we had quite an interesting discussion, Shakil, on a number of things, but now I want to focus on one aspect pertaining to the youth. Where do you think that in today's time and age, in 2018, where do you think that the youth are losing the plot a little, or where are they losing their way?
So I think that sometimes it's a lack of, if you're talking about spiritual or Islamically, for one.
Well, yeah, okay, let's start with that.
So I think there it may be assumption, so you're sort of rushing. You're rushing to get the answer that you want or whatever. So, at all costs you will get that fatwa. They say move to Google. Often a trope gets thrown around. So I think instead of like sitting and understanding the issue and why things are the way that they are, and if there is challenges to be made, then to challenge it, but with the adab and the akhlaq that is required, often we're rushing. So we want to get there so fast that we do it at any cost, and therefore ask whoever is in the position that's doing what they are doing. And so it becomes very big tension, and all that respect is lost. But in terms of just generally losing the plot, I don't know, but I think definitely changing how things are. So definitely a big challenging time we're living in. Access to technology changes the face of our people across the country and across the world. So it's not going to look like it did yesterday. And that creates a moral panic. And youth who are either involved in the very center of it are obviously pushing all the boundaries that they are. And then there are others that are around that same periphery who feel a bit closer to the adults, and they also have moral panic even though they are young as well. So then it becomes this sort of clash of the youth themselves, or ourselves rather, about what is right and what's wrong. But I don't know if we were losing the plot completely. I think maybe just more needs to be done to gain a better understanding or anchoring into Islamic sources for one, or other sources as well, if for those who are not Muslim, to understand where we headed, why we headed there, and in amal bin niyat, so to make the good intentions and hope that we get there. But I don't know if it's all, if Animus and Corpus are both there working together. I think it may be that people are doing things ad hoc, and alhamdulillah the results are good, and sometimes not. But I don't know if we're losing the plot. I think positive things are taking place, and that should be celebrated.
No, I don't mean that youth are losing the plot in general as what I'm saying. Are there areas where you think they're losing the plot? In other words, are there areas of concern when it comes to the youth in today's time and age?
So I think today, substance abuse is probably the go-to place for a lot of the issues. And that comes from maybe a lack of freedom sometimes when people are younger. So people are younger, they don't get to do a lot of things. When they do get to do those things, it's like crazy, it's like going to a theme park and all the rides are free. And then people are trying everything out there. Whereas some other people are raised a bit more openly as they are younger, and they get bite sizes of the real world. By the time they're adults, those things don't matter anymore, and there's not a big rebellion. And then other issues perhaps would be in the aspect of zina. There's obviously a spectrum of when do you speak to people of the opposite sex or opposite gender, and when don't you? And there are many people that are able to do that with actually haya and modesty at university, at school, and there are others that are not able to. And then that's obviously manifesting in really sad ways, where people are actually forced to be married or forced to do certain things that they wouldn't have had to do if they adhered. And then there are other challenges again with regards to motivation. So, having a career, having a future, putting the hours down that they need to. And then this idea of a lazy youth is again repeated. So I think it's lack of motivation on the one hand. It's a lack of, boundaries in some ways. But again, parents and youth are not speaking to each other enough. So it might be that we're running as fast as we want to, but there isn't really the anchor to say, listen, hold it, why don't you do it this way? But the respect also isn't coming from the adults sometimes, where people are feeling shot down at or shouted down upon. So, I don't know, communication I think is key, but those issues have been existing, I think, time immemorially, but they're seeing themselves more manifest today.
Do you think that the youth have too much or too little freedom? I mean, there are arguments made either way. Sometimes or many times you would hear youngsters saying that I'm already 17, I'm already 18, I'm already 20 or 21. Just because I'm living with my parents, does it mean that I have to toe their line? Does it mean that I have to listen to them? Do I still have to have a curfew? How come they still do's and don'ts? Simply because, I live under your roof. Allow me my independence. Show me that you have confidence in me. On the other hand, you would hear the parents saying, listen, it is out of love. We're not wanting to restrict you in life, but there are stages through which you progress. You may have progressed from the stages of infancy to teenagehood, but there's still a few more stages that you need to progress before you are totally your own independent person. Do you think this is something that both parents and the youth grapple with, teachers and students grapple with, and how do we find a balance on this issue?
So it's again the issue of getting somewhere. We all know we should get there, but it's as to how fast we should get there. I definitely think there's a clash between parents and children or young people. And it's often communication. So I can speak from my own example. We sometimes weren't allowed to do certain things. And then the older siblings would be like, no, actually it's okay because they did it before. And don't worry, daddy or mom, it's fine. Other times the no is no. But I think that discussion isn't often happening. So it's either a flat no or a flat yes. and then the child or the youngster goes out and does those things. But it's not really sit down and understand why that was the issue. And actually, when they come home, being awake and actually seeing that they come home, in a state that's okay to come home to, and then understanding how was the function, what happened. Sometimes children open up. I mean, you say, look, mom, actually it was very bad, this and that happened, I didn't like it, I left, I came home early. Other times, no, it was a really good function, we learned this and that, I met so-and-so, they gave salams, the usual. But if there's no discussion happening before and after the event or the thing that's happening, then children don't feel welcome, they're able to speak. And that comes from a lack of intolerance, I think, on the hands of the parents. Because they're like, no, everything that you're about to say now is haram or it's wrong, so don't even speak about it, go sleep. And that just creates other people that children will speak to. But definitely communication can solve it, I think. And then children won't really feel that they need to rush out of the house so quickly or get married to get freedom, Or it's sad that that's happening because people do repeat that often. It's like, one day when I'm married, I'll be able to do all these things. But until I don't, I have to sit under this roof and these rules. But I think parents just need to speak a lot more to young people and understand why it is that we are the way we are and these rebellious people that we are and coming home late or whatever it is. But be awake, or not be awake when you come home, but at least let's chat about how the night went or the day went. And that way we'll remember that, hey, they're going to ask me when I come home, so I better be able to answer.
All right, we take our final break. When we come back, we wrap up. Okay, so we're wrapping up now on the topic of understanding the youth. Shakil, before I let you go, do you think that youth are increasingly in today's time and age, globalization, also a lot of Islamophobia, are Muslim youth facing an identity crisis more often than in the past?
I think perhaps, I wasn't there obviously in the past, but I think definitely like shaping an identity in today's world is not just the way that it was before. So all these other factors play to it. Do you subdue your Islam because Islamophobia, or do you outwardly profess your Islam because you don't want to succumb to Islamophobia? So I think there's a clash and there's a panic among our age group as to how Muslim to be, And then people will say, be unapologetically Muslim, and you get like a movement around that to speak and to, act Muslim at all times. But then you have other friends that are not Muslim, and how do you behave with them? How do you give da'wah to them while still being a youngster that's still maybe doing things that young people are doing? Not the alim or the ulama youngster type of person, just a normal youngster that still, is clashing with their identity. I think there is an identity crisis, but I don't think it's unsolvable. I think, as we spoke about earlier, the ulama and the young people becoming friends again, and that the lines blurring is a good way to move forward. And I think parents just need to communicate better with us and us better with them. And Twitter is a great place. I think Muslim people come together, our age group. Ramadan time is the best because we speak about all these issues all the time. And maybe parents need to peep on that to see what's going on. And they'll understand that there is a lot of wisdom coming out of our age group. And people are not as lost as they think we are. It just might not look the same way that it did before. But with all these influences, I think we're a strong Muslim community. And I think that despite Islamophobia in our country, it's lacking. If it ever had to grow, we would be ready to challenge it because I think we're all equipped with that, definitely.
Shakil Gara, Jazakumullah for your time this evening. We really appreciate it and we look forward to talking to you again in the future, inshallah.
Jazakallah khair for having me. Shukran.
All right, and to the viewers, shukran for watching the program once again. I hope that tonight's program would be a step, just a step, in trying to understand the whole situation in as far as the youth are concerned better. But it's a process, and it's a process that we need to commit to as parents, as those who would consider ourselves as youth, as teachers, as leaders, as scholars, society as a whole, the ummah at large. Needs to learn more about how to understand the youth, the potential, the vulnerabilities for their benefit and for all of our benefit. Until next week, inshallah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
واحتفل بالمودة وامنح الناس حبك بيض الله قلبك بيض الله قلبك